What was the process like to get into 2000?
So we had to run the qualifying standard, which was 2:16, I think, at that time, or 2:14. I'd already ran the London Marathon a year earlier and ran 2:11. That was my first marathon. So
Right.
I already had the time. They pre-selected Steve Moneghetti based on his performances at major championships, which then left 2 spots open. And we were having a trial event on the actual course that the Olympics were going to be on in October, and this was in April. I was up at Falls Creek training 99, 2000, and I'd had a great year in 99. I'd broken Clarkie's 5K record. I'd ran 7:41 for 3K. I debuted at London Marathon and ran 2:11. I'd run a 61 flat half marathon in Japan, in Tokyo, and finished second. So I was like extremely confident, but I basically overdid my training. I started training 3 times a day, and I ended up getting a stress fracture in my pelvis. And so I had to come home from the altitude training. And once it was diagnosed, I was told it was going to be 8 weeks out. And then I would have basically 6-7 weeks to get onto the start line of the marathon. So it was an extremely nerve-wracking period for me. There was a guy from England called Richard Narurka who was living with me, and he was injured at the time, and he was just a cross-training animal. And so I just tagged along with him with the cross-training, and then got to the trials in April, and I finished 5th, which was great off 6 or 7 weeks training. The athlete that won the trial was Rod de Hayden, and he already had the time. So if you won the trial, you were automatically in if you had the time. And then the guy that was 2nd and 3rd didn't have the time. Guy that was 4th, I think, was from New Zealand, and then it was me. And because I had the time, I then got selected.
Right, and then obviously the emotions. Are you a calm man when you got selected, or what was your reaction when you realised I'm running in Sydney?
It was just great. Now I've got to train harder.
Yeah.
And so basically, once I got selected, it was just like, now put in the training and stay healthy and focus on that. So I didn't really get caught up in the emotion.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the old of, you have to run the time, then you've got to get selected, and then you've got to get to the start line. So for me, I had 2 out of the 3 things I needed.
Still needed to get to the start line.
Yeah.
The Olympic Village is something that I'm fascinated about with the Olympics. What was 2000 like?
It was great. Like, we were way out the back, so we had like these sort of bungalow shed things that were set up, so we weren't in any of the apartments. We were on the last day, so I wasn't around for the first week, 10 days. Yep. We were in Cronulla training down there, trying to stay away from the hype of everything. Now, I'd never been to the Olympics before, so I sort of leaned on Steve Moneghetti because he'd previously been to 3. Then we went into the village, but by the time we got in, most sports had finished, so most people were in party mode. So it was a little distracting in trying to stay focused on what the job at hand was, despite the fact that people were in party mode. So you'd be going in to have breakfast and people were coming in from the night out that they'd had. And, it was a little, as I said, distracting, but that's what comes with the Olympic Games.
Yeah. Did you got sleep, though, over the Olympics, or was that kind of a challenge as well?
It was so for us, the marathon was at 4:00 on the 1st.
Yeah.
And,
wow.
So like you sort of got up, and as I said, we are on the very last day, which is a very special occasion to be able to be a traditional event that closes the Olympic Games. But by that stage, there's hardly no one left with events. So when I went down there to have breakfast, as I said, people were coming in and wanting to talk, and I just had to try and stay really focused on the marathon that was going to be that afternoon. So look, it was tough, and particularly because I'd never been to an Olympics, so I'd never seen any of this. And you see all these elite athletes and from all different sports, and it's I was sort of awestruck to be quite honest. But I, in no way, shape or form affected my performance. It was just an adjustment that you can't prepare until you're actually there and you see it.
Yeah. So obviously you hadn't been before. So were there anything that you were expecting to see from the Olympics? Anything that surprised you while you were at the Olympics?
No, I think the thing that helped me was that it was in Sydney. So it was like, I've been to Sydney a million times. I've raced in Sydney. Whereas I think, and that probably might have been to my detriment, that I was probably blasé in regards to that it was only in Sydney, it wasn't a big deal. Had it been in a foreign country, it would have been a lot different because, you have to gain access into the village. You've got to be in the village, like there are restrictions to where you can and you can't go. I think that might have changed my concept a little bit because I was just so driven of like, it's just another race in Sydney, just focus on it. Don't get caught up in the hype. So, it was just, had it been somewhere else, I think the mind shift would have been different and there would have been a lot more things I wouldn't have known. Yeah. Whereas being in Sydney, I was way more relaxed because it was in my country. So the language, everyone speaks English. Everyone, like all the volunteers, are extremely welcoming and friendly. And I knew where we were going because we'd already had a tour of the Olympic Village, months prior to that. So, I wasn't really expecting anything, but I think I also hadn't hyped it up to have expectations on things.
Yep. Running's so like tactical. So for a marathon, when you're walking into Sydney, or like, do you have a plan in mind before the race and you try and stick to that? Like what was the plan that you had?
So my goal was to finish in the top 10 and I felt that I could achieve that and I felt that I was super fit. The plan was to be in the lead pack. I always strive well on not really breaking the race down into certain plans, but to be in the pack and focus on what was going on. And, we were in North Sydney for the race start and I was pretty relaxed and, looking forward to a big event. And we took off and we went over the Sydney Harbour Bridge and I sort of was back just sort of looking to see where all the key athletes were at the time, and then decided to sort of work my way through so that by 5K I was sort of sitting where I needed to sit. I went through halfway in the lead pack. I believe there was 11 of us and I was recorded as fourth going across the mat, and so I was having a day out and really enjoying the atmosphere of the day. So I was enjoying the atmosphere of everything that was going on in the race. And then at about 23 kilometres, we ran down off Oxford Street before we had to head up the Glebe Island Bridge, the Anzac Bridge. And as I was running down, I was overstriding and I just felt this slight pop and I didn't quite know what it was. But as we then leaned to get up into the hill, I was like, it's like a stitch. And I was like, oh, this is not great timing. And as we were coming up over the bridge, I could feel the headwind. And so I dropped off the lead pack. And as we kept going, then all of a sudden a few runners sort of caught up and I tried to tack in and I couldn't. I just felt like this stitch, and stitches come and go. And as we sort of went down the other side, I tried to open up and I couldn't. And as the race went on, I started to fatigue more. The stitch felt worse. I got to 34 kilometres and I started vomiting blood. And anyway, I made it into the stadium and we had to finish within 2.5 hours. Otherwise, you would have to finish on the warm-up track because they were going to do the closing ceremony. So I always had that in my mind. And we also have a rule of thumb when you wear the Australian uniform that if you're going to DNF, you have to take the singlet off and leave it on the side of the road. You're not worthy of wearing it. You finish the race no matter the result. So I was really conscientious of all these things, and I ran into the stadium and I sort of don't really remember much in the stadium, but I remember going to walk out because I was just emotionally distraught. I didn't know what had happened. And as I said, at that stage, I thought it was still a stitch. And then there's the media, but Steve Moneghetti and Rod DeHiding were waiting for me. So we always wait for all runners to cross the line because we know they're not going to pull out. Then I had to sort of navigate through the media, and there was no answers to the questions that were being asked because I didn't know what had happened. And then I was really distraught and I wanted to get away from everything. I felt claustrophobic, and there was a door and I pushed open the door just to get away, and it got me outside the stadium. And I got outside the stadium and I was like, I can't get back in.
Oh no.
And of course the closing ceremony's starting and I'm knocking and I couldn't. And so anyway, luckily the village was only a kilometre or so from the stadium. And I walked back there with just my singlet, shorts, shoes. I was emotional. I hadn't even got my bag from the recovery area. And when I got to the village, they wouldn't let me in because I didn't have my accreditation, because my accreditation was with my uniform. I'm crying. But anyway, one of the security guys go, look, we'll walk you to your room, and if you can produce ID to prove who you are, you can go in. So I walked down there and showed him my ID, and then I got to stay in. And I had no answers. I didn't know what was going on. And we found out a few weeks later that I'd actually torn my rectus abdominis, which came as a result that I had the stress fracture at the start of the year, and I fast-tracked to get to the start line of the trials marathon. I qualified, but then because I had qualified, I didn't then take the time to let my body recover from the stress fracture and all the training that I'd done in that short period of time. I was like, I've made the Olympics, it's business now, let's get into training. And unfortunately, I was overcompensating, and because I didn't allow my body to recover, I took that into the marathon, and it was just a simple thing of overstriding down the hill that my rectus abdominis popped as a result of overcompensating for the previous stress fracture I'd had.
So. That's such a long process, injuries, and how like they can impact a race long down the track.
Yep.
How do you manage that? So, for instance, like with your stress fracture, if you didn't have the Olympics in 7 months' time, would you have been still in that recovery for?
I would have taken the time to recover adequately,
Yeah.
and then I would have slowly and gradually built up to my training and would have picked a marathon at the end of the year. But I had to run the trials to make the team, and then I'd made the team to make the Olympics. So I was trying to get exemption from the trials based on having the injury and my performance at London in 99, and then also breaking Clarkie's record. We put everything in, but they'd already pre-selected Steve Moneghetti, so they weren't going to pre-select me. And so I had to prove my worth. And yeah, I mean, it would have been great to have been given the exemption to fully recover, but the selection criteria was the selection criteria, and I had to do it.
So after Sydney, how long did it take for you? Obviously, it's a hard situation that you were put in. How long did it take before you could kind of emotionally get back to normal?
That's a really good question. I think the disappointment of the Olympics hung around with me. For those that followed my career, like I was very honest in everything. So if I was going to do a race, I would critique it extremely well and honestly, and sometimes that comes with a price, right? So I was open that I wanted to be in the top 10 of the Olympic Games. I felt that being a home Olympics and being someone on the up, that, you know, I had nothing to lose and I would run well. And then of course I finished 66th. I've never watched the Olympic Games, but it was 66, and I know it was under 2:30. It was 2:29 something, and I only know that because we had to finish the race in 2 hours and 30 minutes. But I was out one night in Geelong at the Eureka, and normally after a race, I would have like a marathon race. I'd usually have 2 or 3 weeks of downtime, and that would mean going out, partying, you know, just doing what you do with your friends. And yeah, we were out at the Eureka one night, and some guy just turned around and asked me how it felt to let my country down. And
oh my God.
I was like, wow, I've just come out to have a beer. And so I didn't really handle that well, and sort of realised that when you do open your mouth, you become a target. So there was the physical side, then there's the emotional side. And the emotional side I didn't let go of for probably the rest of my career. So it was a motivating factor for me and drove me with everything that I did, and probably drove me at times too hard. But it was one of those things that through the embarrassment of that performance, that I wanted to make sure that every Olympics I went to, I trained harder than I'd previously trained for that, which again came at a price. And I don't think having a coach or a mentor could have changed that aggression or that mental psyche that I was in, just because that's just how I was. I was always referred to as a sprinter in a distance guy's body. You know, it was just always on. So yeah, it took a while. I went to Rotterdam in April of 2001, and I ended up finishing 5th and ran 2:10. So that helped jumpstart me back in again to getting on with business. But as far as the disappointment of Sydney, that hung with me for a very long time.
So when you, like, obviously you need to bounce back, and what's the most important thing to, I guess, recover emotionally and getting back to normal? Because obviously that was a tricky time for you. How'd you get through that?
Well, I just said I didn't get over Sydney for many years. I carried that through with me, like even after I retired.
Did it play?
Being able to get back into running helped.
Yeah.
So, because that was my job. Being able to do extremely hard workouts with Mona, like we would always push each other in training workouts, and we'd get the best out of each other. So I think being able to get back to work definitely helped. But there was always this driving force with, the next 2 Olympics that I went to, that it was more than just the Olympics. It was to atone for what happened in Sydney, which it never came. So it's one of those ones that you eventually try to find peace and calmness. And I probably found that in my coaching of elite athletes in the US, that I could sort of slowly start to let it go and focus more on the psychological side of coaching than just the physical side.
But in Athens was your best performing Olympics. So after 2000, would you agree? Was that your best? Were you happy with that?
It was my best performance, but it wasn't a great race.
You're right. Okay.
I had gone into the Olympics training extremely hard. I was doing those 240K weeks. So my easiest day was 10 miles in the morning, or 16 kilometres in the morning, and then 16 kilometres at night. I probably went to Athens cooked. So and Steve Moneghetti says this, he could just tell, like, he come to some of my workouts and my workouts were just out of this world. And I probably got on the plane and it was probably more relief that I could actually not train so hard now and get ready for the race. And at Athens, I felt like a car that had 5 gears, but only 4 were working on that day. And it started very early on. Always at the front, there's a lot of surging early on. And with the first few surges that happened, I couldn't respond quickly. My leg turnover wasn't coming as fast. I was lagging. And then anyway, there was a significant surge, I think probably 10 miles, and I couldn't go with it. But I was able to run that pace all the way through. I was just strong all the way through without being energetic or electric at any point. So, I finished the race and, I felt like I could have gone faster and harder, but I couldn't. That was as fast and as hard as I could go. So I do think that, again, I talked about the Sydney experience. I put so much into Athens that it wasn't just about the training. It was atonement for what happened at Sydney. And I made every training workout matter. I made everything that I did in my behavior matter. That included food and treatment. And I even had a little thing on my bathroom mirror that had the Panathinaike Stadium. And I had a little sticky thing that had 1,000 days. And I was just peeling those off every day.
Wow.
To get to that point. Oh, sorry, I tell a lie. It was 364 days. I did it a year out.
Yep.
But I hadn't missed a day in training. I'd had over 1,000 days accumulated in training. And again, I feel like I put so much pressure on myself, and I went into the race with not the purity and the beautiful part of running, which is like that's the celebration part, right? Like, you've done all this training, you get there, you celebrate it. But for me, it was just business. I was just so dialed in that I wasn't relaxed enough, and I paid the price.